Trittin, and today we're going to discuss the Concerto by Burnet Tuthill. This concerto is for tenor saxophone. It's Opus 50 and was composed in 1965. The publication date is 1967 by the Southern Music Company. Now, the first thing I want you to notice about this piece is the dedication. This is dedicated to Cecil Leeson. Now, Cecil Leeson is an important person in the historical progression of the classical saxophone. He was born in 1902 in Candu, North Dakota, if you can believe it. And he has a special affection for me because I also from North Dakota, and I always knew about Cecil Leeson. And it's just one of those things, it's not necessarily where you come from, it's really what you do with your life and how you promote and develop your talents in yourself to see where you really get in life. Anyways, Cecil Leeson taught at Northwestern, and he started saxophone studies in the 1920s. Now, the 1920s was the saxophone craze, but it was for popular saxophone, not classical saxophone. And Cecil Leeson was one of those guys here in the United States that really promoted the saxophone and became a concert saxophonist. Around this same time, Marcel Mule was doing the same thing in Paris, in France, and then also Sigur Roscher a little bit later with that were also the big proponents of classical saxophone. If you don't know these gentlemen, please look them up and be well aware of who they are and what they have done for classical saxophone for all of us. Mr. Tuthill's Concerto for tenor saxophone is one of the mainstay pieces for the tenor saxophone. And start by learning the one movement for a contest piece, but I really highly recommend that you learn the entire piece because it's a great piece of music. Let's talk about some of the composition devices that he uses in the first movement today. It's really interesting how he puts together and juxtaposes a duple 2-meter against a triple meter. And this occurs all the time. He changes it within the phrase of the saxophone, but he also pits the triple and the duple from the saxophone against the piano. And it's really interesting to see how that develops and to look at it. Now, what I want you to do is also look at the piano score and not just the tenor saxophone score so that you can see how these things kind of develop as they go through. Now, at the beginning, he starts with an andante. The quarter note equals 60. When you move into the next section at measure 27, he immediately goes to an allegro at the same pulse. But all of a sudden now, that pulse is 1 beat per measure as opposed to 1 beat per quarter note. Now, the beginning has a very, very good triple, very lyrical, very sad. It's almost, I feel it would be mournful more than sad. I think it's even greater than that. It moves very, very slow, and you need to be very cautious to make sure that you really hold your tempo down. Now, these parts right through here, looking at measure 13 right at the opening, it's really interesting. We don't want to just play these notes straight forward. And I think what we need to do here is really emphasize the downbeats and that note of a G moving into the A flat. We have a nice half-step notion here. And I think really the G is the more interesting note here. So when you play this note, make sure you put more weight on it going into the A flat. Going into measure 14, the same thing occurs. The E to the F, you have another half-step. And then going into measure 15, B natural to C. All of these half-steps really lean into that first note and really push it forward and create that half-step motion. You can hear how I'm really accentuating the first note of each of those groups of 2 by putting more weight on it and creating a little bit more vibrato speed. Now, this opening phrase is, once again, we need to look at the whole thing. Notice at measure 20, he also gives us back this half-step motion again, and we want to do the exact same thing here, but with a diminuendo. The next thing I want to talk about is the phrasing as we go through here. Really try to perform this whole first phrase from measure 13 all the way through measure 19 in one breath, and then taking a breath at 19. Now, there is one option between 15 and 16 that you could use, and you would have to treat it maybe just a little bit different. But notice the crescendo that you get at measure 15, but the line doesn't really stop once you hit 16. It really keeps on moving all the way forward until you hit the E flat in the next measure. So if you take a breath at this spot, which is the logical place that you would maybe take a breath, what it does is it breaks up this forward progression. So as you put this together, make sure that you're really working on trying to maintain that forward progression even though you take a breath. And you can make that crescendo feel like it's pushing across a breath, and you just have to work at it and listen for it. So if you can hear it, then it will work as well. But it's a lot better if you don't take a breath so you can push it through. I'm going to start really at measure 15 with the pickup note. And we'll do it both ways. Listen to the first way of not taking a breath and how the phrase really pushes through all the way to the E flat. Now you can hear how I continue the crescendo all the way through the phrase. Now this time I'm going to take a breath. Notice how it breaks it up a little bit, but I'm going to continue to try to crescendo even though I'm taking a breath. Now I think it works better if you don't take the breath, but it is a long phrase, moving very, very slowly, so you will have to work on it and try to get that technique so you can accomplish and not break up the musical line when you get to that spot. Listen also. At the conclusion of the opening section at measure 22, the piano then takes over an accelerando, a molto accelerando, to triple our tempo so that we can get up to about 66 to the dotted half note at the allegro. The saxophone then enters with a new melodic material at that measure. Now notice how the phrasing is put together here. This is where he juxtaposes a duple against a triple. Now here's a really important thing that I think you need to do. Make sure that when you get to this spot, that you look at the piano score, because what happens is the piano puts us into the new tempo, and the piano really sounds like it is in duple as well. And then when we hit this melody right here, we have this duple feeling, but the piano does not continue to play and give us a one tempo of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so the listener is going to actually hear this part as being in duple until we get over to measure 30 or so, and then all of a sudden we get into triple meter. It's really one of these interesting techniques that composers use to throw the listener off guard, and it makes them think what's going on, and it really accentuates their attention. Now, to create this duple feel, it's really important. This is one of those spots, again, where the highest note is not necessarily the important note. So at the allegro section, when you come in, make sure that you are accentuating the duple, and make sure that the downbeats of that duple, the B natural, the F sharp, the D, the B, all sound like they are downbeats in a duple, maybe a cut time. And then once you get to the measure 30, then you can start feeling the 1, 2, 3, which is really the tempo that you want. Now, make sure that you put more weight on the B natural, and when you go up to the E flat, you back off on that. Otherwise, it's going to sound a little bit lopsided, and you don't want that. So take a listen here. Make sure it's almost like a little decrescendo. And then we go into our 3. Let's go a little bit faster. Notice how we accentuate the downbeats on every beat. The allegro section of this first movement of the concerto is in 3 large phrases. And we just finished the first phrase, and it ends at about measure 37. In measure 39, we get the repeated melodic content just at a step higher and with some slight variations. He starts with that duple figure again that we talked about at the allegro opening, and then he goes into the triplet feel around measure 43 again. And then this goes up and finishes more on a questioning phrase. And here at measure 45, 47, we need to push through this to make sure that it sounds more like it's a question, because we don't want the phrasing to end quite yet. At measure 51, he goes back to the same melodic material as he had at the allegro, but then he throws in a variation. Here's the going into measure 50. Listen how you need to make sure that you really make sure the phrase continues and leave it hanging up at measure 50. He's leaving it hang right there because then now he continues back to the opening notes of the allegro melody. Now here's the triplet figure. It's very easy to accentuate this triplet so it sounds like it's the most important thing in this line, but it really isn't, and we don't want to accent it or overemphasize it. So I want to encourage you to really work on smoothing that out. But really the important thing that you want to listen for here is this descending quarter note line that goes over the next 4 measures. Listen how those quarter notes go, and I think you're going to hear something pretty familiar. It just moves down in a chromatic scale. And those those are the notes that we want to emphasize in these 3 or 4 measures with lots of vibrato. We don't want this triplet figure to be overemphasized and stick and take away from that. So as you play it, try not to accent the opening or the downbeat. It should have a feeling because it wants to be in 1, 1, 2, 3, but don't give it a oomph or any of that extra energy. Here's measure 51. Let's listen how this goes together, trying to de-emphasize that triplet figure. And our next section in this piece is called the Appassionato. It's very reminiscent of the opening section, but he has an appassionato here. Like I said at the beginning, I feel that it's being almost mournful. It's so slow, so evolving. Here, it's not quite the same thing. So I think because of the dotted half note in the 1 beat, I think it just has a little bit different character and you want to move through it. But the appassionato he has here, it's a little bit confusing with all of the markings here, but I believe the mano mosso is right from the beginning. Notice that the tempo is just a shade slower than the allegro. You don't have to worry too much about the less motion portion of this because he doesn't have as many notes right here. You need to be concerned with making sure it feels like it's in 1 so that we get that nice triplet feel. Most of this continues on in 1. He does not interpose the duple against the triple through here. So really just think of it as a nice, beautiful, longing melody. The big thing I think here is breath. Make sure that you really take the phrases as far as you can go. So your opening phrase, really try to get that to move all the way to measure 96 without any breaks. He has a small crescendo in there. Really make sure that you accentuate that. But there are also some other things. He has an espressivo, so feel free to really hear where that musical phrase is going and really open it up and do something with it. Don't let it just languish on 1 dynamic level or 1 vibrato level. Let's play a little bit of this and take a listen. There's our opening phrase. And notice that one thing I did is made sure that we can feel this in 1 and that there's a little bit more of a pulse on beat 1 so that we can really, really hear it. A nice interesting effect he has is at measure 90. Notice how he has this descending chromatic line again, just like he had previously. And I think if you heard me, what I did at this spot is I actually brought the dynamic down a little bit, which allows me to really bring up the next crescendo in the next measure. Let's listen to that a little bit more carefully again and listen for those things. And then he moves through here. But as you listen to this entire phrase, what you'll find is that it doesn't really feel like it wants to stop. This is a good spot to take a breath right here, but this phrase does not feel like it wants to stop. I think you can grab another breath right after the end of measure 102 after the B flat, and then that will give you enough breath support to continue through. I also believe that as you go through measure 105, try to modulate and get your dynamic level to be at such a position that you can allow it to decrescendo even at measure 105 as you move up this chromatic scale. It's a nice little ending that it gives you as a variation. Thank you very much to Saxophone Today and publisher David Gibson for providing a link of this tutorial on their publication, Saxophone Today. If you're not familiar with Saxophone Today, I encourage you to look at their website and look at a sample issue of that magazine. It has many, many interesting articles on saxophonists who are working in the country today. It gives you lots of hints and tips and interviews with those saxophonists. It gives you more information than you could possibly ever want in one location. It's a great publication, and I encourage you to subscribe and take a look at that publication on a regular basis. I'm sure it's going to help your development out as a saxophonist. Thank you very much.